Good morning, everyone. We studied today the portion of Vaera, and I'm starting from the Likutei Sichos, volume 37, the first talk of the Rebbe. I was looking for one of the plagues discussed in this week's portion that is is less known than the first two or three. Everybody knows blood, frogs, lice, but there is one plague, number 6, called boils. Have you heard of boils?
Yeah.
What is this plague about?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Boils appeared on the skins of all the Egyptians.
Boils appear on the skin
Common that they
of the animals and the men,
everyone
everywhere in
they
Egypt.
couldn't really look.
How did it happen? So I'm going to read to you the text. Now, I could have been speaking about the first one, blood and frogs. The Rebbe has a talk about this one, and I like exciting some new things. Here is the text, the 6th plague in the Torah. We're going to read the whole text. We're going to dissect the first part, but then when we get to the answers, we'll see how the second part accommodates and how makes this plague a very unusual and unique plague. God said to Moshe, I'm reading chapter 9, verse 8 through 12. In this week's Torah portion, by the way, how many plagues we have? 7. Okay? 8. Darkness, locust, and firstborn, death of firstborn appears in the next week's portion. So in this week we have the 7. God said to Moshe and to Aaron, take for yourself a double handful of furnace soot, and Moshe shall throw it towards heaven in front of Pharaoh's eyes. So that's the first thing. Take soot. Soot is a ash. Soot from a furnace. And both full hands, and let Moshe throw it towards the heaven. In Hebrew it says Hashamayma, to the sky, but it refers to heavens, in front of Pharaoh's eyes. It will become dust upon the entire land of Egypt, and it will become boils, breaking out into blisters upon men and upon beasts throughout the entire land of Egypt. This is the commandment. Here is what they did. They took furnace soot and they stood before Pharaoh. Moshe threw it towards heaven, and then boils broke out into blisters on men and beasts. And now the last part, which will come back, but I want to share with you now. The sorcerers could not stand before Moshe due to the boils, for the boils were upon the sorcerers and on all Egypt. God strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not listen to them, as God had said to Moshe. This is the text we're going to be dealing with, boils. So now, Passover, you will be able to speak about boils.
Yeah.
We're starting with Rashi. Rashi, on the first text, says the following. Rashi says that there were many, many miracles in this plague. One is that he,
Moshe, four scoopfuls in sand, which is unusual, and it's very irregular.
What was very regular?
Aaron gave him the soot in the sand, so he had like 4 cupfuls, which is like should have fallen through his hand, but didn't.
That's the first. So Rashi says there were many miracles. That's the introduction, and it says the following. One, that Moshe had a full hand, both hands, full hands, and Aaron full hands. That's what God says. And they both came into one hand of Moshe, because when you throw, you cannot throw with 2 hands, you have to throw with 1 hand. They have to throw it to the heaven, very far. So 4 handful of soot came into 1 hand. That's the first. The second one, another one, it says Rashi, and one, that it spread all over Egypt. It spread all over Egypt.
You can't throw, you could throw up with 2 hands, just like that.
But it will go on your face. Soot Sand, take sand.
No, if there's a wind blowing like a can, but the miracle was it went upward.
Can I take a rock and throw it like that? How far will it go? How far? 10 feet?
Maybe.
Now, if it's true that it's light, I don't understand how you can throw it without getting all black. So how can you do it with two hands?
Take it to the beach.
Huh? So you do it with one hand. Commentators ask, why Rashi start by saying there were many miracles? Then he says one miracle that the 4 handful fit into one, and that it spread all over Egypt is another one. In other words, there are only 2, not many. Number 2, if you look in the Midrash tells us a 3rd miracle. The Midrash, that's Rashi's source, lists a first miracle that Rashi avoids, which is that the first miracle was that it reached all the way to heavens. God says to him, Hashamayma. It says that they did it, Hashamayma. That's what they did. Shamayim is sky, is heavens. We say heaven now. It says that Moshe did, Vayizrok oto Moshe Hashamayma. Moshe threw it up to the sky. Rashi avoids this miracle, that it went up to heaven. So according to the Midrash, you have 3. Rashi says many miracles, but he lists only 2. Says the Rebbe, the Nachmanides, I'm not going in order because the way it's written is for scholars. I'm sharing it with you so that you can share it with others. So I'm reorganizing and omitting parts. Nachmanides, who is a commentator to the Torah, says there was another miracle. The miracle was that the soot was boiling hot. That's why it's called boils. And Moshe, when he threw it, it was boiling. The miracle was that it remained boiling hot. And that's how it created blisters. It says, throw the soot and let it be boils, and let the boils create blisters. In other words, Nachmanides says, read the text. It was hot boiling soot that came from the furnace. Remnants left over. Huh?
How do they pick it up?
And that's the Rebbe's point. The Rebbe says Rashi avoids this miracle because then becoming blisters is not a miracle, it's a natural outcome. If I have something boiling on my skin, it will create blisters. In addition, the Torah does not say anything about a miracle for Moshe and Aaron taking it, meaning that it cooled down. Naturally, it cools down. You take it out of the furnace, it's cooled down. Nachmanides says, no, it was boiling hot. But says the Rebbe, that cannot be an extra miracle Rashi is hinted to. Right, says the Rebbe, and the Rebbe finds all of that in Rashi, which is beyond me. This is all, I believe, teaching of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says Rashi disagree with Nachmanides. There was no miracle that it was boiling. It was cooled down already. Otherwise, Moshe and Aaron couldn't lift it. The miracle was that these boils, the dust, actually became blisters. The Rebbe says that what bothered Rashi, and he's addressing here, hinting to an unusual punishment in the boils, in this plague number 6, is in the words of the Torah that Moshe must throw it with all of its might. It says, Uzrako Moshe Hashamayma. You have to throw it all the way to the heaven, meaning you have to use all your energy to perform that act. Rashi was bothered. Why does he have to do it? And let me explain. This is, to me, it's so fascinating to see. It helps us understand all the other details in the story. If you look at the other plagues up to this is number 6, the purpose of bringing the plagues is not just to punish the Egyptians, because for that God could have brought the last one, death of firstborn, and if it doesn't help, he'll kill them all. God could have punished them in many other ways. Part of the purpose is to Veyadatem ki ani Hashem. You know that I am God and I am in charge of every detail of the universe. Who is going to learn? Naturally, it's the Egyptians. They should admit there is a God. But it's also Jewish people, by the way, because otherwise they wouldn't be willing to accept the Torah. Only when God brings the 10 plagues, the Jewish people will accept God as their Lord. So therefore, the first three, we all know, God says, you should know I'm God. The sorcerers were able to replicate it, right? Until lice. Blood, they did the same. Frogs, they did the same. When it comes to the lice, the sorcerer says to Pharaoh, this is the hand of God, because they have no control over anything that's smaller than a grain, a barley grain. And therefore, lice were so small, sorcerers cannot control. It must be a heavenly act. What happened to number 4 and 5? Wild beast and the death of the animals. That's number 4 and 5. It doesn't say that the sorcerers tried to replicate, because after the third they saw it's God's hands, they didn't even try, even though they could have, but there was no point in proving, because God already proved to them that there are things he can do that they cannot do. When it comes to boils, something very unusual. God is asking Moshe to do natural activities, to do things that he did not ask before. In other words, every one of the plagues was a lot of miracles are involved. To turn water into blood, one large frog comes out and they hit the frog and a lot of small babies come out. That's great miracles. But the miracle was only one. There was one major miracle, not much. The only and even if there were many other miracles, we know by the blood, for example, if a Jewish person drank water, it was water. If an Egyptian joined him with the same vat drinking, the Egyptian was blood, the Jew is water. Only when they paid the Jew, the blood turns to water. There was a lot of miracles. Rashi never bothers with the detail of many other miracles. Rashi is just mentioning one miracle, turn into blood. Same is about frogs. There are many. They jumped into the ovens even though they got killed. They entered into their bodies internally. And Rashi does not bother with the details of miracles. Here, the only exception is hail. Hail as was fire and water coming down as a hail. But that's the exception. We always have an exception. When it comes to boils, the 6th one, there is two opposites. On one hand, God is asking them to do many activities before the plague arrives. For example, he says, go and take a furnace, a handful full of furnace soot. And then they have to throw it with all its might to the heavens. In other words, the other times is lift your staff. That's what it says. The first plague, hit the water. The second one is, he says to Aaron, lift your staff. The third one, hit the sand. There's only one activity and a miracle happened. Here he's asking him to take soot and not just throw it, to go to Pharaoh, throw it with all his might, and that's what bothered Rashi. And then it has to spread all over Egypt. And then it has to turn into boils, and the boils will become blisters. So there were many natural activities that involve Moshe and Aaron's doing. On the other hand, miracles happen one after the other, except Rashi is listing, Rashi says there were many miracles. Here is a list of miracles. Number 1, as Rashi said, the biggest 2, is that 4 handful came into 1 handful. Number 2 is spread all over Egypt. But there are many other miracles. One is, how is it possible for a handful of soot to spread over a large space of Egypt? And I'm surprised Harry didn't mention that. Because let's put 4 handfuls of soot miraculously into 1 hand of Moshe. How much do you have there? 50 grams, because it's light, right? You have how many particles? 500,000? Spread it all over. Throw it as far as you can. It would cover what? 50 feet? 100 feet? It cannot cover miles upon miles. Spreading all over Egypt is a great miracle. Number 2, says the Rebbe, there is another miracle, that it didn't have to cover their entire body. One grain, one particle touched the skin, and their body became full of blisters from what? Where? The entire body. It's another miracle. Then the fact that boils turn into blisters is another miracle. In other words,
Boils do turn into blisters.
huh?
Boils do turn into blisters.
When it's cold, one grain.
No. But you're saying,
So here, Moshe and Aaron had to get soot. They had to put it in his hand. He had to lift it with all his might and throw it as far as he can. But yet, the miracle is it spread all over Egypt. Number two, that a little bit now is covering such a large area. Number three, one grain touched the body and the entire body is full of blisters. Number four, that this grain, this little thing, turns into blister. It's a miracle. Says the Rebbe, if you look in blood and frogs and lice, he needed to do something, but he needed to do one thing, totally unrelated to the outcome. It was one miracle, a miracle happened. What happened to number 4 and 5? They did not get involved at all. God says tomorrow, all of the animals will die. That's number 4. The next one, that's number 5. Number 4, the wild beast. They didn't have to lift a staff or throw some water. Because God says tomorrow, tell Pharaoh, tomorrow morning, wild animal, a mixture of beasts, bears, scorpions, lions, tigers, hyenas, they all will come, descend upon you. Can have all your hunters you want and all the traps, it's not going to help. And this is what happened. Moshe didn't even get involved at all in bringing it. Blood, frogs, lice, Moshe was involved very little, poquito. When it comes to death of the animals, number 5, and number 4, beasts, Moshe and Aaron were totally uninvolved. By the way, the next one, number 7 and 8, Moshe was involved. Moshe and Aaron had to hit the water, had to hit the sky, they had to do stuff. Shchin, boils, number 6, they didn't do one act. They do many, many acts. Says the Rebbe, that's what Rashi is referring to. If the purpose is to show us that God is in charge, that God runs the show, the less a human involved, the greater the God is. Is that correct? In other words, if you tell Moshe, and Aaron, you have to hit the water, Pharaoh can bring a sorcerers and they do the same. So they question if God is in charge. If you tell Aaron to hit the water and frog will come out, the sorcerers did the same. So he did not believe yet that it's God's hands. Flies, Aaron had to hit the sand, and they said, now we cannot do it. But still, a man was involved in bringing it. The next 2, there was no human involvement. Now they had no choice but to admit that it's God's hands. Because what they do, all the sorcerers make magic with an object, with an activity. They had to say words, they had to hit something, they had to do something. Moshe and Aaron didn't do anything. They just warned Pharaoh, tomorrow it will happen. Comes number 6, says the Rebbe, God wanted to show them that there are 2 opposites. On one hand, I will get Moshe and Aaron involved in many, many activities that without human interference, it cannot happen. On the other hand, the outcome would be so great that you cannot ever connect it with their activity. So therefore, says Rashi beginning, a lot of miracles happen, as I enumerated a bunch of them. However, Rashi says 1, and he brings that 4 handful fit into 1, and 2, that it spread all over Egypt. These are the only ones that cannot be explained. Their activity was very involved, but cannot be explained unless God is helping them. Every other miracle you can justify, you can explain, you can find. Says the Rebbe, that's what it means. Right after that, the Torah says that the sorcerers could not stood. Remember, I read it to you and I told you. This verse 11. The sorcerers could not stand before Moshe due to the boils, for the boils were upon the sorcerers and all of Egypt. Says the Rebbe, why does the Torah tell us that about the sorcerers? If they couldn't stand because boils covered their skin, they had the issue with the lice too. Lice, they were scratching their heads all day. They couldn't stand. In addition, with frogs, the frog entered their body, quack, quack, quack in their stomach. They couldn't stand before Pharaoh. Same is about every one of the other. The wild beasts who are in the street, they couldn't come to Pharaoh's palace. But the Torah don't bother mentioning that because what the Torah, according to Rashi, there is other commentators, what it refers to, they're standing with their sorcery, not physically, because physically they could have stand there or they couldn't, it doesn't matter because it's the same as the other previous plagues. Here what happens is they could not tell Pharaoh what is going on. Until now, the first three, they can argue that it's a magic. The other two, they say it's not magic, it's God's hands. Here, it was a mixture of the two. And despite so much involvement of the hand of Moshe and Aaron, at the same time, the miracle was so great that there is no way to explain it. Now we can understand why Rashi says there were many miracles, because as I said, I'm going to share it again. Miracle number one is that they took soot in 4 handfuls and they had to pour it all into 1 handful of Moshe. Miracle number 2, Moshe had to throw it with all its power, and yet it spread all over Egypt, which is impossible to explain. Miracles number 3, that 1 handful, even though it's times 4 handfuls, was sufficient to cover the entire land.
That's number 3. You just repeated the same one.
Okay, let's call it number 3. Number 4 is that one grain, one speckle touched the body, the entire body was affected. Number 5 is that the speckle that touched them turned into blisters, not just boils, blisters. Blister means a lot of bubbles and the skin is so itchy, you cannot do anything other than scratch yourself. All that is because in this one, this is the first time. And by the way, that's why, says the Rebbe, if you look at the rest of the plagues, the other 3 plagues, there will be no sorcerers. The servants will come to Pharaoh and says, the land is getting destroyed, let them out. There is no sorcerers who are trying to replicate, convince them, even though they might be. They can bring the locusts. The locust is something they can control.
They gave up. They gave up?
Not only they gave up, they're the one to admit that it's impossible other than God running the show. And in that way, now we understand boils in a way we never understood before. Now we can understand why God says to Moshe to use the hand and to do it, as opposed to the previous 2, number 4 and 5, where there was no involvement. Now we can understand Rashi is mentioning only 2 and says 1 and 1, because in those 2, the exact opposites exist. The miracle happened with the involvement of a human hand. And that's why this is the first time the sorcerers say to him, they cannot stand before. In other words, they don't argue, they don't say it's God's finger, like in lies. They cannot even stand, meaning there is no way they can explain that. They are totally lost. And now we can understand why you won't hear from the sorcerers anymore. Yes, Harry?
You mentioned God could have just gone to the darkness and killing the firstborn, and that was it, but he wanted to show the Egyptians that I am God.
Yes.
There's another midrash, and I don't remember every one of them, but every one of the place where the Mida connected Mida of what they did to the Jews. So blood was whatever it is, they punished them because of what they had to do. Also with the animals, right? We used to have the Jews walk their animals at night and day and so on. But every one of the place have a
Harry, what you're saying is correct, measure for measure, but there's nothing to do with letting the Jews out. They can let the Jews out and then it goes one after the other, measure for measure. What does that have to do? It's not connected. It's not interconnected.
Thanks for connected.
Measure for measure have nothing to do with letting the Jewish people out. They can let them out.
First he punished them.
Who says that? Let the Jews out and then punish them. No, in addition, it says, Leman teda ki ani Hashem bekerev haaretz. You should know that I am God the Lord. You should know that I am God. When God says Moshe, he says to him, I want you to make sure that the Egyptians acknowledge God. And as I shared with you, it's not just for the Egyptians, it's also for the Jewish people. If it was out of just punishment, measure for measure, it would have happened way after the Jewish people left. And that's the conclusion of our discussion too.
Thank you, Rabbi.